Hello, friends. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Your Health Matters here on News Radio 570 WSYR. We're going to dive right in because I have a special guest joining me today who was on with us last year, a little over a year ago. I had Dr. Ray Dorsey on to talk about, well, a lot of things having to do with Parkinson's disease and also about a book that he has written called Ending Parkinson's Disease. Well, we talked about that last year, and I'm excited to announce that this year, 2025, on August 19th, his newest book is going to be released, and it's entitled The Parkinson's Plan. Dr. Dorsey, welcome. How
Thank you
you
very
doing?
much, Paul. Delighted to be with you. Call me Ray.
Okay, Ray. Well, Ray, it's great to have you with me, and I'm excited about getting this book. In fact, I think I pre-ordered the audio of it because it'll be on Audible if I'm correct.
It's on Audible and it's on hard copy, and it's got 25 ways to reduce your risk of ever getting Parkinson's disease.
Well, this is a perfect segue because I wanted to ask you sort of two questions in one here. How does this want to build up on the message of the previous book called Ending Parkinson's? And yes, this book introduces the Parkinson's 25 checklist. Can you tell us about all that?
Parkinson's disease is one of the world's fastest growing brain diseases, but its first major description was in 1817 when Dr. James Parkinson, a 61-year-old British surgeon, described the condition that he said had not been classified in the medical literature. 200 years later, 6 million people are estimated to have the disease, and today it's estimated to be 12 million. So how do you have this exponential rise in this disease that had not been classified in the medical literature over the span of 200 years? Aging alone is not sufficient to explain it. The genetic contributions to Parkinson's disease are modest, and genetics don't change that much in 2 centuries. So it really has to be the environment. And so in our previous book, we said that Parkinson's disease is largely a man-made disease. We doubled down on that contention in this book with stories and more evidence of the role that chemicals in our food, water, and air are playing in the disease. And because Parkinson's disease is largely a man-made disease, it's therefore preventable. And so in this book, we give you the Parkinson's 25. I'll show you a little picture. Unfortunately, it doesn't look as good in black and white, but it's 25 ways individuals can reduce their risk of ever getting Parkinson's. And if they already have the disease, these recommendations may slow the rate. And if you want, I'll give you the first one. Let me give you the first one.
Oh, please. Yeah, let's dive right in.
So number one is wash your produce, even your organic ones. Pesticides have contaminated our food supply. Remnants of pesticides are found in 20% of common foods. Organic produce, dairy products, and meat can reduce exposure, but can still have unsafe residues of pesticides. So wash your produce at least with water, and consider simple vegetable washes, vinegar, or salt solutions too.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. It takes me back to something we talked about last year. If I remember correctly, you grew up in Western New York State. Is that correct?
I was a faculty member at the University of Rochester for many years before recently moving to New York City.
Okay, and then I know being in Syracuse, New York, and west of here in particular, I believe there's been a fair amount of pesticide use like paraquat and other things that we know have a link to all kinds of problems. So washing the vegetables sounds like actually like a no-brainer in some ways, but well, organic, you would think maybe it shouldn't be toxic in any way, but apparently it can be.
It can be. So I think Consumer Reports did a study, or maybe it's Environmental Working Group recently, that found that even organic produce, one, has residues of pesticides on it, and two, can sometimes have unsafe levels of pesticides on it. I used to think the food we eat, the water we drink, and the air we breathe was safe. When my wife said we should buy organic when our children were young, I poo-pooed it. But over the last 10 years, I've gotten better educated and actually increasingly concerned that our food, water, and air aren't safe, and that they're fueling the rise not just of Parkinson's disease, but of other neurological conditions and other chronic diseases.
Sure, sure. Well, what's another thing on the list of 25?
Sure. I'll give you one a little more provocative. So How about this one? Dry clean cautiously. Dry clean clothes release dangerous chemicals like trichloroethylene and perchloroethylene into your car or home. To limit exposure, first consider minimizing your dry cleaning. Second, find a dry cleaner that does not use perchloroethylene or PCE, called PERC in the dry cleaning industry. Third, if your dry cleaner does use perchloroethylene, air out your clothes before taking them inside the home. Take off the plastic bag and let the clothes breathe so you don't have to breathe in the chemicals.
Oh, yeah. That's, it's interesting, sad, but true. We have a person who comes here to my clinic who actually had a fitness facility located on a second floor, which in that case was above a dry cleaner. And the way the ventilation system worked was, I guess, not very, very good. But I guess we can never trace it back for sure and say that's why she has Parkinson's, but she has Parkinson's and she's really struggling.
So she worked in a fitness facility above a dry cleaner?
Yes.
So,
And lived across from a golf course too for 10 years. And they were also spraying with some bad stuff.
So I'm learning this just now. So my colleague, Dr. Brittany Krzyzanowski, and my colleagues, they did 99% of work. And I recently showed that simply living near a golf course within 1 mile of a golf course is associated with a 124% increased risk of developing Parkinson's. And then in our book, we highlight a study done in New York City that showed that 24 of 29 apartments evaluated had a high level of the dry cleaning chemical, unsafe level of the dry cleaning chemical in the apartment above a dry cleaner. Do you want me to read you a little excerpts?
Oh, please.
Yes. In the early 1990s, the New York State Department of Health evaluated the concentration of perchloroethylene, the dry cleaning chemical PCE, in the indoor air of apartments over ground level dry cleaners in Albany and New York City. And 39 of the 40 buildings tested, the level of PCE in the indoor air was found to be unsafe. In some cases, the concentration of PCE was more than 1,000 times the safety threshold. In a 1992 letter to the EPA, the New York State Department of Health wrote, "Our data suggests that even state-of-the-art equipment may not adequately protect the many people living in apartments adjacent to dry cleaners."
That is actually frightening, right? And then my son is a physician. He also did a PhD. It had to do with neurodegeneration of the brain. One of the things they found in one of their Parkinson studies down at Hershey Penn State, Dr. Shu-Mei Wong was his mentor. I don't know if you know her or ever knew her, but wonderful lady, very proactive neurologist like you are. And she was saying that even people who get their clothes dry cleaned don't go near the dry cleaner, don't live near it, but just wearing those clothes on a daily basis can also be a potential hazard. And with that said, we can talk more about that when we get back. We've got to go out to our first break, friends. We're with Dr. Ray Dorsey talking about his upcoming new book called The Parkinson's Plan. This is Your Health Matters here on News Radio 570 WSYR. See you in a minute. We're back here on Your Health Matters, News Radio 570 WSYR. Today, our special guest is Dr. Ray Dorsey, and we're talking about his new book to be released August 19th called The Parkinson's Plan. Dr. Dorsey, can we talk a little bit about prevention versus treatment? Maybe focusing on prevention, because that would be ultimate, right? If we can have more of us preventing this disease, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think, unfortunately, in Western medicine, especially in the United States, when we make a diagnosis of a condition, we immediately go to treatment. You're diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, you get prescribed levodopa. If you're just diagnosed with depression, you get an antidepressant. You get a headache, you get a pain medication. I think it's really important to figure out why people have a disease. And I'll give you at least 3 reasons why. One, if you know why they have the disease, you can prescribe the appropriate treatment. Two, you might be able to figure out how to slow the rate of progression of that disease. So if a farmer comes in with Parkinson's disease and they're still using pesticides that are toxic, maybe a good opportunity to have them stop getting exposed to those toxic pesticides that are fueling the rise of the disease.
Sure.
And third, most powerfully, if you know why you have a disease, you can prevent it. And an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and we can just prevent diseases. We prevent HIV. We figured out what the cause of HIV is. We prevent it with a condom. The incidence of HIV in the world is decreasing. It's at its lowest level since 1990 because we got really serious about preventing the disease. Mothers Against Drunk Driving got tired by getting their children getting disabled or killed by drunk drivers and focus on preventing drinking and driving. And because of the work of Candace Lightner and women like her, 10,000 fewer Americans each year die in car accidents. That's 10,000 families not torn apart, 10,000 schools not destroyed, 10,000 communities not grieving because of the work aimed at preventing a disease. And if we figure out what causes Parkinson's disease, and I think we lay out a case, what are many of the principal causes, not all of them, but many of them, we can prevent it, we can slow it, and we can treat it. And some people really want a cure, and I'll point out that a prerequisite to a medical cure is knowing its cause. So if you want to cure Parkinson's disease, let's find out its cause.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it looks like you said, when we look at the number of cases now, they're more than ever, and it's on the rise. So do you have any projections, any data on what is predicted, like 2030, 2040 with numbers of cases?
Yeah, so we projected, I think by 2030, 2035, and Michael Oken and Bob Bloom, I think we predicted like 13 or 14 million. I think we're off because the Global Burden of Disease study estimated last year that in 2021, nearly 12 million people have the disease. Another study just came out very recently suggesting that by 2050, the number of people will double with Parkinson's disease. This is not a fait accompli. This is not a fait accompli. We can prevent, slow, and treat Parkinson's disease in new ways and prevent the rise of Parkinson's disease. In our book, we lay out 3 goals, 0, 10, 100. We say that in the next 10 years, by 2035, that the global rise and the number of new cases of Parkinson's disease will be 0%. That by 2035, we can halt the rise of Parkinson's disease, and that means in 2036, we can start celebrating the fall, the demise of Parkinson's disease. And we lay out 20 actions as part of our Parkinson's plan to help enable this to happen. The second goal is 10. By 2035, the next 10 years, we increase research funding tenfold, and we increase the proportion of that funding aimed at prevention from going from 2 pennies on every dollar to 2 dimes. If we increase the amount of research focused on preventing the disease, we can slow its rise. And then finally, by 2035, we want to ensure that 100% of people around the world have access to levodopa. Today, a goal of the UN AIDS is to make HIV therapies, which are more expensive, more costly, more complicated, and less safe than levodopa, available to 90% of people with HIV. If that can be done for HIV, why can't we make levodopa a safe, inexpensive medication available to 100% of people with the disease?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Really good point. When it comes to things like, let's say, science, cutting edge science or technology, if I was studying correctly on the advanced notes about what's in your book, it mentioned something about cutting edge methods and recent technological advances that can be helpful in various ways. Is that something we can talk about?
Yeah, so our book is a new path to prevention and treatment. So we cover both, and we actually point out as part of the plan, there are 4 elements of the plan. 1, P, to prevent the disease. 2, learn why the disease starts. So that helps you go from prevention to treatment. 3, to amplify the voices of those affected. And 4, the N, to navigate the new frontiers of treatment. And Dr. Oken lays out in the last, in chapters 8 and 9 in the book, the treatment horizon for new therapies. And these include what's available in the short term within the next 5 years, what's available in the midterm, next 5 to 10 years, and what's a little bit farther out in the next beyond 10 years. I'll just give you a quick examples of some of the things that he highlights on the frontiers of new treatment.
Sounds great.
So I'll just show a picture. So here are the new frontiers, navigating the new frontiers of the treatment. So even if you don't like to read, the book has lots of pictures, including Parkinson's 25 and the new frontier. So you can just look at the pictures. But in the near term, he really focuses on reorganizing the Parkinson's fingerprints. So what are the fingerprints of the disease in people's bodies, blood or skin, for example, or spinal fluid? How can we reorganize artificial intelligence to find us better treatments? Can we, for those who have a hereditary form of the disease, less than 15% of people carry genetic risk or risk factors of the disease, can we manipulate those genes or target therapies aimed at the genetic causes of the disease, recognizing that they're rare? Can we purpose existing drugs for Parkinson's disease? And can we reorganize electrical and pump therapies for Parkinson's disease? There have been new pumps, just like many people know that people with diabetes can get an insulin, so they don't have to write themselves injections. There are new pumps that can now go deliver levodopa or compounds like levodopa underneath the skin, and they might be effective. Full disclosure, I've done some consulting for those companies. And then we highlight additional things in long term. What can we do to regenerate the circuits infected by Parkinson's? What can we do around gene editing or really nanomedicine, using really, really, really tiny particles to deliver vaccines or anti-inflammatory medications directly in the brain to slow the disease.
That's pretty amazing right there. I've known a few people, most who I've met in my travels, none here locally, although I'm sure there are, who have a pump surgically installed in them somewhere. It starts with a V, I think.
That go into the intestines.
Yeah.
I think it's quite likely that we can inject the same medicine or similar medicines underneath the skin that'll obviate the need for doing therapy.
Oh, that sounds good. I mean, less invasive, right?
Yeah, I think people would rather have the medicine go underneath their skin than in their intestine.
Yeah, I would. For sure. Well, I tell you what, with that said, we're going to head out to a break. We're talking about Dr. Ray Dorsey today. And this to me is just so fascinating. I'm really excited to get the book when it comes out, because you very so nicely give hope. You tell us all these things that we can do to prevent, treat, and that there's some hope on the horizon. And I love the fact that the word plan is in the title of the book, because even by talking about the numbers from, projections, goals by 2035 and beyond of seeing the demise of this disease, I love that, as that is the thoughts of a visions from a visionary like yourself who wants it to go away, which we would love. Okay, folks, we're with Dr. Ray Dorsey. We're going to head out to break. This is News Radio 570, WSYR, Your Health Matters. See you in a minute. We're back with Dr. Ray Dorsey talking about his new upcoming book release, The Parkinson's Plan. Dr. Dorsey, I remember you made a statement last year that you, at that time, exercised an hour a day, but if you had Parkinson's, you'd exercise 2 hours a day. So I guess the reason I'm asking that or saying that is because it seems like exercise, which we talk about all the time on the show, friends, don't we? We talk about this constantly. You get to hear this from me again today. That's such a great idea to get moving, because a lot of times once you get moving, even if it's a walk, you'll get the energy to stay moving, and the benefits go so wide and so far. Well, I'd love to have you, Dr. Dorsey, tell us about the relationship of exercise and fighting disease, Parkinson's, and other things too.
So not surprisingly, Carl, on our Parkinson's 25 ways to prevent your risks reduce your risk of getting Parkinson's and possibly slow the progression is exercise. So we wrote this. In his best-selling book, Outlived, Dr. Peter Attia wrote, I now tell patients that exercise is full stop and hands down the best tool we have in the neurodegeneration prevention toolkit. Vigorous exercise can lower the risk of developing Parkinson's, and moving every day is also beneficial for those who already have the disease. In a recent study, aerobic exercise, stationary bike at least 3 times per week, reduced brain atrophy and stabilized disease progression. So if you don't want to get Parkinson's, exercise. If you have Parkinson's, double down on exercising. We're recording this in advance of the release, and just last week, a study came out in the New England Journal of Medicine that looked at exercise and colon cancer. So 2 things that we might not necessarily tie together. I really haven't. And they looked at people who had colon cancer, who had surgery for the colon cancer, and had chemotherapy. So these are 60-year-old individuals, had colon cancer, diagnosed, treated with surgery and chemotherapy, and randomized them to get a brochure on exercise or an exercise treatment program. The exercise treatment program increased the amount that they walked, amount they exercised by the equivalent of 3 hours of brisk walking a week. So nothing rip-roaring. We can walk 3 more hours per week. The risk of recurrence was reduced. The risk of death was reduced by 37%.
Wow. Yeah.
They showed that for every 14 people who had colon cancer and exercise, that would prevent 1 death.
That's amazing.
So if you have a little support group for Parkinson's disease, if you all exercise and you had colon cancer, you would prevent 1 death. If this is the relationship between exercise and colon cancer, what's the relationship between exercise and Parkinson's disease? I think it would be even more. So even if you have Parkinson's disease, this does not mean that you're resigned to ending up in a wheelchair or a nursing home. It's a terrible disease, but there are things that we can do that will very likely slow the rate of progression of the disease. And these interventions have nothing to do with taking a pill. And so we write down the 25 things that we think to do. We give you detailed evidence. I read you little snippets. In the book, we give you larger chunks. And the book is filled with 50 plus pages of references so you can investigate the evidence in greater detail for yourself.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm wondering, okay, so one of the things that I've been, saying here on the air and teaching when I travel or whatever here in my clinic, this is just based on conversations I've had with other people who are, neurologists or researchers. It seems to me that, well, I'll just say Dr. John Rady at Harvard was saying to me, this is like years ago, the part of the body that benefits the most from exercise is probably the brain. Now, whether he's right or not, I don't know, but I'm no John Rady. I'm just Carl. He does a lot of stuff, and you know a lot of stuff. And it seems, though, from the research that when we elevate our heart rate moderately, zone 2 maybe, it doesn't have to be sprinting and things, that we can realize the production of maybe brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which helps to decrease improve cellular function, integrity, function, and lifespan, slow down the death of dying brain cells, maybe. I mean, is this still what the research is saying?
Yeah, and Dr. Boss Bloom, so exercise likely releases growth factors in the brain that likely protect the nerve cells that are damaged or dying and may slow or prevent their demise. Dr. Boss Bloom, who was an author with us on our first book, Ending Parkinson's Disease, showed that you can perhaps reduce cortical atrophy or brain atrophy in response to exercise for individuals with Parkinson's disease. There's just a wide increasing range of evidence. The challenge with some of these studies is, how do you measure what's going on in the brain? You randomize people to exercise and not people to exercise, and what are you going to measure in the brain? So it's really, really hard to get inside the brain. It's not like, you can't just, generally, there aren't great biological markers in the blood, at least right now, for measuring things that are going on in the brain in Parkinson's. But the evidence, I think the greatest therapeutic breakthrough this century, we've had no great new medicines or no great surgical techniques this century. I think the greatest therapeutic advance this century has been the realization that Parkinson's disease the exercise is beneficial for people with Parkinson's disease.
Sure. And Plus, if you think about it, the brain needs a lot of blood and oxygen to function. And so raise the heart rate, get more blood and oxygen to the brain. Just
That may be part of it. There probably more,
oh
but
yeah, oh I'm sure.
uh,
Yeah,
studies have clearly demonstrated that exercise is beneficial. How? We still need more research to figure that out.
interesting. Well, before we go to break in a couple of minutes, let's talk a little bit more about prevention. What other information would you like to give us on that?
Well, so in the book, we highlight that certain pesticides in our food are likely contributing to Parkinson's disease. That certain chemicals in our water, dry cleaning chemicals, trichloroethylene, perchloroethylene, are likely contributing to Parkinson's. We highlighted how these chemicals can get into your indoor air. They readily evaporate. They're volatile. And so your friend, for example, who worked above a dry cleaner may have gotten Parkinson's from breathing in polluted air inside her
Sure.
gym. And then fourth is we highlight how outdoor air pollution, pesticides from golf courses, pesticides from nearby farms, or just the particulate matter that you see in the sky in Los Angeles or in New York State during the Canadian wildfires, how that is associated with Parkinson's disease. But it turns out that these things aren't just associated with Parkinson's disease, that these chemicals in our food, water, and air are not just fueling the rise of Parkinson's, they're fueling the rise of other brain diseases, likely ALS, where pesticides absorbed through the skin could be contributing to the disease. Air pollution, we know outdoor air pollution is increasingly associated with cognitive decline and dementia. The Lancet Commission estimated that 45% of dementia may be preventable. Dementia, as you know, has more of a genetic component than Parkinson's disease. If 45% of dementia is preventable, what percent of Parkinson's disease is preventable? And so I think we can prevent diseases from autism to Alzheimer's disease by having clean food, clean water, and clean air.
Yeah. Wow, that's powerful. Well, I have a lot more questions on that. I'm gonna ask some of them when we come back from break. Again, everybody, we're with Dr. Ray Dorsey today talking about his upcoming new book release, August 19th, 2025, called The Parkinson's Plan. My name's Carl Sterling. You're listening to Your Health Matters on News Radio 570 WSYR. Gonna head out to a break. Got to keep the sponsors in, or we can't keep doing the show. So we'll hear from a sponsor, and then we'll be back. We're back with Dr. Ray Dorsey. We're talking about Parkinson's disease, amongst a few other things today. One of the things that I find interesting is, and this is a question that I get a lot in my travels and here in my clinic, is Parkinson's hereditary? Well, we know that it can be, but it seems like it's much more so environmental factors that play a role in how somebody gets Parkinson's. But when we're looking at the, let's say, the inherited gene for or whatever, and having the hereditary component involved, what's happening? Is there a particular gene that's mutating?
Yeah. So there's a great study that the Parkinson's Foundation, kudos to them and the investigators that are as ongoing. It's called PD Generation, and they're signing up individuals with Parkinson's disease who want to better understand the genetic risk. And they offer genetic counseling and genetic testing as part of it. The first 10,000 people, they published the results in 2024 in one of our top journals called Brain. And they found of that first 8 to 10,000 individuals that 13%, 12.5% carry a genetic cause or risk factor for the disease. So said another way, 87% of people with Parkinson's in the United States and in North America don't have any known genetic cause or risk factor for the disease, but 13% do. So what are those? So about 1 or 2% have mutations in a gene called Parkin. And if you have these mutations, sometimes you need to have 2. It's virtually certain that you will develop Parkinson's disease if you live long enough. The most common genetic cause of Parkinson's disease is a mutation in a gene called LRRK2, LRRK2. Tends to be more common individuals of Ashkenazi Jewish descent or North African Berbers. This is about 2 to 3%. If you carry this genetic mutation, you have a 40% increased risk, about a 40% lifetime risk of developing disease. And then the most common genetic risk factor is a gene called GBA. And individuals who carry this mutation, depending on the mutation type, have about a 10% lifetime increased risk of developing the disease. Okay. These genetic factors are important for a number of reasons. One, we know the mechanism behind these is they lead to damage of the energy producing parts of cells called the mitochondria. It turns out that those certain pesticides, those dry cleaning chemicals, and air pollution also damage the energy producing parts of cells. So the environmental causes of disease are basically, in many cases, mimicking the effects of the genetic causes of the disease. These genetic factors also might explain why certain individuals, dry cleaners, farmers, firefighters, people who serve in the Air Force will go on to develop the disease, and why some people don't. We know that only 10% of smokers develop lung cancer. So there have to be other factors that explain why some smokers get lung cancer and why some don't. Or in this case, why some farmers in Western New York will develop Parkinson's disease, but most will not. And genes might play a role in it. We know that genetic risk factor GBA has an interaction with pesticides, so that if you carry this genetic mutation, it might be even more important for you to follow the Parkinson's 25 to minimize your exposure to certain pesticides and other environmental toxicants. On the flip side, 87% of people have nothing to do with any of these known genetic causes or risk factors. Now, it's possible we missed some. We've had 37,000 studies on Parkinson's disease and genetics, so I don't think we've missed major ones. But there are likely factors in terms of how we break down pesticides or toxins, just like people metabolize medications differently from one another. People metabolize toxins in our environment differently from one another. And those genes, which we need to investigate a little bit more, might tell us why certain individuals get the disease and why some don't.
Yeah, really interesting. So you answered one of the questions I was going to ask, which is if you carry one of these, well, if you're in the population of, let's say, LARC2.
Yes.
And you're around, tetrachloride, paraquat or whatever, that could expedite the process of mutating the Parkinson's, correct?
It could. Now, we haven't studied that, and more research needs to be done, but it turns out that LARC2 genes encode for proteins. Genes give you instructions for how to make proteins. And so the LARC2 gene encodes for the protein called LARC2. And it turns out people who have a LARC2 mutation have increased activity of this LARC2 protein. It also turns out that trichloroethylene, widely used in degreasing compounds, the same chemical that contaminated the marine-based Camp Lejeune, also increases the activity of the LARC2 protein or LARC2 kinase. So you have the most common genetic cause, and I think perhaps the most common environmental cause of Parkinson's in the United States, both having the same biological effect.
Yeah, interesting. And you mentioned the word mitochondria there. Hey, folks, you ever heard that word before? Of course, we talk about it on this show a whole lot. And we get talking about mitochondrial dysfunction and with various guests about oftentimes that being at the root of chronic disease, various diseases. So we want to keep those mitochondria healthy, and they're the battery packs for our cells, and we want those batteries full and operational and giving us all the great energy we can get to live long and healthy. Well, Dr. Dorsey, we've got about 3 minutes left. Can you maybe discuss what's on the horizon, the hope? Because I know we talked about this on the break. There is hope, and I'm so glad about this, and your book illustrates this. Share with us, please.
Yeah, I think there's a ton of hope.
Thank you. We need it.
There's a lot. So you think about it, there are some diseases that we no longer have that were plagues, pandemics on us, and now are in the history books. Smallpox, polio. We largely live in a world polio. Some of your listeners are young enough to remember when polio closed down swimming pools in the summer, closed down churches, closed down community centers. Drinking and driving is less common. HIV might disappear as a major clinical entity in our lifetime. The list is long. I think that our generation has a responsibility to receive these gifts that we've gotten from previous generations and to reciprocate. And I can't think of a greater gift to future generations as a neurologist to give future generations where Parkinson's disease is increasingly rare, maybe even largely non-existent, maybe just incredibly rare like it likely was when Dr. Parkinson described it 200 years ago. If in the span of 200 years we went from 6 to 6 million, why not the next 10 go from 6 million to 6 million or 12 million to 12 million and then start the decline? You can give future generations, if you have Parkinson's disease, and neurologists, don't we have an obligation to make sure our kids don't get this disease?
Yeah.
And if I'm right, if my colleagues, Michael and I are right, that just even 1% of Parkinson's disease is preventable, 1% of Parkinson's disease is preventable, that will save society, United States society, $500 million, double what NIH spends on Parkinson's research, more than what the Michael J. Fox Foundation spends on research, thanks to the Michael J. Fox Foundation, and more than the global sales of Paraquat, according to The Guardian. That's just if 1% is preventable. I think we're going to need to prevent the vast majority of Parkinson's disease and give a world where Parkinson's disease is largely exists in the textbooks and is no longer a plague or a pandemic on all of us.
That would be absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. So, folks, well, let me ask you this. I'm sure this book will be available in all major booksellers, right? Amazon and everywhere. Is there a best place for people to get it?
Yeah, so the Parkinson's plan comes out August 19th. It's available at booksellers, Amazon, independent bookstores, Barnes & Noble, wherever you like to buy your books. Michael, Oken, and I are devoting the vast majority of our proceeds to efforts to prevent and treat the disease. If you have questions about the book or questions you want to share us your story, you can just email us at info@pdplan.org, info@pdplan.org. If you want to learn more about the book, you can just go to our website, pdplan.org. I want us to be part of the generation, you, Carl, your listeners, and me, that brings about the demise of Parkinson's disease. And if once we bring about the demise of Parkinson's disease, we should think about what brain diseases are next. And I think ALS is next on the horizon.
Oh, boy, that'd be great. Dr. Dorsey, thanks a million. Really good to see you again.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Dr. Dorsey. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Be sure to get that book when it comes out. And in the description is a link to several places you can get it. This is News Radio 570 WSYR, Your Health Matters. My name is Carl Sterling. Remember, move your body, use your brain every single day. Have a great week.